My mom texted me, "We changed all the locks. You don't live here anymore." They really thought they were so bold, laughing about it. Then 2 days later, I got an urgent email from their lawyer. "We have a serious problem. Call right away." Imagine receiving a text message from your own mother after you've just lost everything that casually states, "We changed all the locks. You don't have a home anymore." That's how my world shattered into a million pieces last month. What felt like an unthinkable betrayal, a cruel joke, was actually just the beginning of a story far more twisted and unbelievable than I could have ever imagined. Just 2 days after that text, an urgent email from a lawyer I'd never heard of landed in my inbox, and suddenly, everything I thought I knew about my family, my past, and my future completely flipped on its head. My story begins in a place that looked like a dream, a picture-perfect colonial in Oakwood Heights, a leafy, middle-class suburb just outside Boston. From the outside, our 2-story house with its manicured lawn and classic white picket fence was a postcard of American aspiration. But behind that perfectly painted facade, inside those meticulously kept walls, my parents, Brenda and Gary Adams, ran our home less like a sanctuary and more like a tightly controlled military academy. From my earliest memories, every single aspect of my life had to adhere to their rigid expectations. Brenda meticulously scheduled every hour of my day: piano on Mondays, swimming on Tuesdays, academic tutoring on Wednesdays. Gary, my father, would scrutinize my report cards with a brutal red pen, each grade below an A met with a sharp, disappointed sigh. "Harper," he'd declare, pushing my B+ math test back across the kitchen table, "excellence isn't optional in this family." My younger brother, Caleb, bless his heart, adapted perfectly to this suffocating environment. Years my junior, he quickly became the golden child, following every rule, every expectation, without a single question. National Honor Society, captain of the debate team, eventually gaining admission to our father's alma mater, Caleb checked every single box on their perfect child checklist. I, however, seemed to have been born with a constant "why" on my lips. But why do I need calculus if I want to be a writer? I dare to ask, only to be met with exasperated sighs. Because Adam's children become doctors or lawyers, not struggling artists, Brenda would snap, her tone ending all discussion, her word final. By high school, our home had devolved into a silent battleground. I'd join the school newspaper, they'd enroll me in pre-med summer camps. I'd apply for journalism internships, they'd schedule hospital volunteer hours. This constant, draining push-pull exhausted all of us, but neither side, neither they nor I, would ever truly surrender. When college application season finally arrived, I played their game, feigning interest in pre-med while secretly applying to business programs. The day that acceptance letter from Northeastern's business school arrived, complete with a partial scholarship, I knew it was time. I finally laid my cards on the table. "I'm going for business, not medicine," I announced at dinner, sliding the envelope across the polished wood. The silence that followed stretched for 10 excruciating, suffocating seconds before Gary finally spoke. His voice was cold, decisive. "Then you'll do it without our support." They weren't bluffing. While Caleb would later receive a fully funded education, every dime covered, no questions asked, I worked 3 grueling jobs: campus bookstore mornings, waitressing evenings, and retail on the weekends, just to cover what my scholarship didn't. Those years forged an independence within me, yes, but they also carved a canyon between my parents and me, a chasm that never truly healed. After graduation, I landed an entry-level marketing position at a promising tech startup. The salary barely covered my tiny apartment and the mountain of student loans, but it was mine. For 3 years, I poured myself into building that career, visiting Brenda and Gary's house only on major holidays, where conversations remained stiff, superficial, and always tense. Then, the bottom fell out. My startup lost its funding, downsized, and eventually collapsed entirely. The job market froze solid, and after 2 agonizing months of unemployment, my savings were completely depleted. I faced the unthinkable. I had to ask Brenda and Gary if I could move back home. Temporarily. 6 months, tops, I promised, practically begging, as they reluctantly cleared out Caleb's old room. Just until I find something stable. From day one, the arrangement was beyond strained. It was suffocating. They immediately reimposed the same archaic rules they'd had when I was 16. Curfews, chore charts, and mandatory family dinners where Brenda would subtly, oh so subtly, mention that medical school applications were still an option for someone my age. Every single job rejection email that landed in my inbox became fresh ammunition for their relentless argument that I'd chosen the wrong path. Marketing for tech companies in this economy? Gary would scoff, shaking his head. You could have been halfway through your medical residency by now. The tensions escalated with each passing day of my 6-month stay. My contributions to household expenses, whatever meager amount I could scrape together from occasional freelance work, were instantly dismissed as insufficient. My frantic job search efforts were unfocused. Every interview for positions they considered beneath an atom's was met with silent, piercing disapproval. I was an adult, yet I was treated like a child, constantly reminded of my failures. The final, absolute straw came after I lost a truly promising job opportunity at a digital marketing agency. 5 interviews. 5. And I was second choice. The email, delivering that devastating news, hit my inbox while I was sitting at the kitchen table, trying to hold myself together. Maybe this is a sign, Harper, Brenda said, watching me fight back tears. Your grandmother, Eleanor Jenkins, would be so disappointed to see you struggling like this. That comment, it ignited something primal inside me. Eleanor Jenkins, my mother's mother, had been my greatest champion, my unwavering supporter, before her death 3 years prior. She was the one who secretly slipped me checks during college, who always told me to follow my passions. To hear Brenda weaponize her memory like that? It was too much. Don't you dare tell me what Grandma would think. I snapped, the words practically tearing out of me. She was the only one who ever supported me unconditionally. What followed was the worst, most explosive argument we'd ever had. Words like ungrateful, failure, and disappointment flew across the room like daggers. I accused them of never loving me for who I was. They shot back, calling me entitled and delusional about my capabilities. I stormed out, needing to breathe, needing to escape, spending the night at my friend Chloe's apartment. The next morning, I had another job interview across town. Not my dream position, but it was something. Something that could get me back on my feet, back to independence. I texted Brenda, promising I'd be back that evening to talk more calmly. I never, ever imagined that by that evening, I would literally have no home to return to. The job interview actually went surprisingly well. The role was for a content marketing manager at a small, stable company. Less glamorous than my startup days, sure, but with reliable pay and benefits. As I walked back to my car, a fragile glimmer of hope sparked within me for the first time in weeks. Maybe this was it. My ticket back to independence, away from the suffocating tension that had become my parents' house. During the drive home, I even practiced what I'd say to smooth things over after last night's explosion. Let's start fresh, I rehearsed aloud. I have a really good feeling about this interview, and I'm genuinely grateful for the roof over my head while I get back on my feet. It was just after 4:30 p.m. when I pulled into the familiar driveway. The house looked exactly as it had that morning. Neat hedges, Brenda's perpetually cheerful garden gnome standing sentry, the American flag by the front door gently waving in the crisp autumn breeze. Everything appeared normal. Then I tried to open the front door. My key slid into the lock, but it wouldn't turn. That's strange, I thought, jiggling it harder. Maybe it stuck. I tried again, wiggling the key more forcefully, but it still wouldn't budge. Hello, I called out, knocking firmly. Mom? Dad? The lock seems jammed. No answer. My heart started to thud a little harder. I walked around to the side entrance by the kitchen, the door we used most frequently. Again, my key slid in, but wouldn't turn. A cold, heavy dread began to settle deep in my stomach. I tried the back door. Same result. My hands were shaking. Standing on the back patio, I pulled out my phone and called Brenda. Straight to voicemail. I tried Gary. Straight to voicemail. Finally, in a desperate move, I called my brother, Caleb, who lived 2 hours away in New York City. Caleb, hey, something really weird is happening. I can't get into the house and Mom and Dad aren't answering. A long, excruciating pause. Harper. I think you should check your texts. My blood ran cold. I pulled the phone from my ear and saw a new message notification from Brenda, a text that had arrived during my call with Caleb. With trembling fingers that felt suddenly clumsy and numb, I opened it. The words were a punch to the gut. We changed all the locks. You don't have a home anymore. After last night, we've decided it's time for you to figure out your life on your own. Your things will be boxed up and available for pickup on Saturday when we'll be out. Arranged to have everything removed by 5 p.m. The ground literally seemed to tilt beneath me. I read it. Then I read it again. And again. My parents had locked me out. They had actually changed the locks while I was at a job interview. My temporary home of 6 months and my childhood home of 18 years before that was suddenly, utterly inaccessible. Through the shock, a bitter, hollow laugh escaped me as I typed a reply. How funny, how brave they think they are. It was pure bravado. Inside, I was crumbling. I immediately tried calling them again, both numbers. Still off. I looked up at the house, at my bedroom window on the 2nd floor, and the sickening reality hit me. All my possessions were inside. My clothes, my laptop, my professional portfolio, my birth certificate and passport, everything. Harper? You still there? Caleb's voice came through the phone I'd completely forgotten was still connected. Did you know about this? I asked, my voice barely a raw whisper. Not until an hour ago, he admitted, sounding profoundly uncomfortable. They called me after they did it. Look, they're really upset about last night. Just give them some time to cool off. Time. I choked out, a wave of pure disbelief washing over me. Caleb, they've locked me out. All my stuff is in there, my documents, my work materials, everything. I have nowhere to go. Maybe stay with a friend for a few days, he suggested weakly. I'd offer my place, but Lisa's parents are visiting, and forget it. I cut him off, shock quickly giving way to a searing anger. Just tell them this is illegal. They can't just throw me out without notice. I'll talk to them, he promised, his voice weak. Just don't do anything to make it worse, okay? I hung up, my hand shaking, and sat in my car, staring at the house where I'd grown up. Through the kitchen window, I could see Brenda moving around, deliberately. She wasn't looking outside. She knew I was here. They both knew. With shaking hands, I called Chloe, the friend I'd stayed with the previous night. Chloe, I need a huge favor. Can I crash on your couch again? My parents. My voice broke, unable to finish the sentence. My parents changed the locks. They've kicked me out. Chloe's outrage was immediate and, oddly, incredibly comforting. They did what? Of course, you can stay here. Oh my God, Harper, that's horrific. Do you need me to come get you? No, I have my car, I managed, a choked sob escaping. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Thank you so much. As I started the engine, Mrs. Wallace, the elderly neighbor who had lived next door since I was a child, approached my window, her face etched with concern. Harper, dear, is everything all right? I saw you trying the doors. I could barely meet her eyes, humiliation burning through me. My parents changed the locks, Mrs. Wallace. They've decided I'm not welcome anymore. Her face fell, a look of profound sadness. Oh, sweetheart, that's not right at all. Do you have somewhere to go? Yes, a friend's place. But all my things are still inside. She reached through the open window and gently patted my hand. I'll keep an eye out. If I see them leaving, I'll let you know. Maybe you can get your essentials then. I mumbled my thanks, pulling away from the curb. As my childhood home receded in the rearview mirror, I felt like I was 16 again. Powerless. Completely misunderstood. And utterly, terrifyingly alone. That night, curled up on Chloe's couch, was arguably the lowest point of my entire adult life. After she'd gone to bed, I finally allowed myself to shatter. The betrayal cut deeper, sharper, than anything I could have ever imagined. These were my parents. The people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, to be my safe harbor. Instead, they had quite literally locked me out of their lives because I didn't fit their predetermined mold. I scrolled through old family photos on my phone until 3 in the morning, tears blurring the images, wondering where it all went so terribly wrong and how on earth I was supposed to rebuild my life from scratch with most of my possessions held hostage. Little did I know, in just 2 short days, an unexpected email would land in my inbox, turning this entire nightmare completely upside down. Waking up on Chloe's couch the next morning, it took a few disorienting seconds to remember why I wasn't in my own bed. Then, the brutal reality crashed down. I was effectively homeless. The fundamental validation of having a permanent address, a key that opened my door to my space, had been stripped away overnight. "I made coffee," Chloe said, padding into the living room in fuzzy slippers. Her tiny, cozy one-bedroom apartment was filled with plants and colorful throw pillows, a stark contrast to the sterile perfection of my parents' house. "And I called in sick to work. Figured you could use the company." "You didn't have to do that," I choked out, fighting back a fresh wave of tears at her unexpected kindness. "Well, someone should be on your side," she said simply, handing me a steaming mug. "So, what's the plan?" "A plan?" "Right. I desperately needed a plan. First, I tried calling Brenda and Gary again. Both numbers went straight to voicemail. I left messages that started calm, then became increasingly desperate. "Mom, Dad, please call me back. We need to talk about this. This is illegal, you know. You can't just throw someone out without notice. Please, at least let me get my important documents and work computer." Silence. No responses. Around noon, I drove back to the house, hoping to catch them leaving or returning to force a face-to-face confrontation. The driveway was empty, both their cars gone. I'd forgotten it was Wednesday. Brenda's standing lunch with her church friends. Gary's golf day. Mrs. Wallace spotted me from her garden and hurried over. "They left about an hour ago," she confirmed gently. "Your mother was carrying a shopping list, so they might be gone a while." I eyed the house, my mind racing through options. Could I find an open window? Should I call a locksmith? But then what? Break into my own home, only to have them call the police on me? The thought made me sick. "Harper," Mrs. Wallace said gently, drawing me out of my desperate thoughts. "Your father gave me this for you before they left." She handed me a sealed envelope. Inside, I found a typed letter. It was cold, formal, impersonal. "Any attempt to enter the premises without our permission will be considered trespassing. Your belongings will be available for collection on Saturday between 2 to 5 p.m. as previously arranged. We expect all items to be removed at that time." It wasn't even signed, just printed, like a notice to a tenant. Like I was a stranger. "I don't understand how they can do this," I said, my voice breaking, the last shreds of my composure crumbling. "That's my home too." Mrs. Wallace shook her head sadly. "I've known your parents for 25 years, and I've never approved of how they treated you. Your grandmother, Eleanor Jenkins, would be heartbroken to see this." The mention of Eleanor Jenkins sent a fresh, sharp pang through my chest. She'd been my safe harbor, my rock, during the worst storms with Brenda and Gary. After she passed 3 years ago, I'd lost my greatest ally. "Thank you for being kind," I managed, my voice thick with emotion. "At least I know someone's watching the house. I'm worried about my things." "I'll keep an eye out," she promised, her gaze steady. "And Harper, this isn't your fault. Remember that." The rest of the day became a blur of grim logistics, the unglamorous reality of sudden, brutal displacement. I found a coffee shop with free Wi-Fi to scour for jobs, made an appointment at the DMV to replace my driver's license. The original was inside the house, along with everything else, and then I called my bank. The bank delivered yet another devastating shock. My parents had removed me from the joint account we'd established when I was in college, the very account where my freelance checks were deposited, the account that held my last $847. The primary account holders made this change yesterday afternoon, the bank representative explained, apologetically. "There's nothing we can do, as you were listed as a secondary holder." I'd been financially cut off. My parents weren't just forcing me out, they were systematically, cruelly, erasing every single one of my safety nets, one by one. That evening, scrolling mindlessly through social media on my phone, I saw a post from Caleb. Family dinner photos. Brenda and Gary, smiling, perfectly composed, around a homemade lasagna, Brenda's specialty. The caption read, "Nothing like mom's cooking. Blessed family time." A hot wave of pure, unadulterated fury washed over me. I hurled my phone across Chloe's couch. They're acting like everything's normal. I practically screamed when Chloe looked up, startled. Like they didn't just throw their daughter onto the street. And Caleb's playing along. Chloe retrieved my phone, her expression gentle. "Your brother's always been their puppet, Harper. You know that. But he could at least acknowledge what they did was wrong." "Family loyalty is complicated," she said, her voice soft. "Speaking of which, you can stay here through the weekend, but my boyfriend, Ben, is moving in Monday, remember?" Ben was Chloe's boyfriend. They'd been planning to move in together for months. Of course, I mumbled, the words feeling hollow. "I'll figure something out by then." But the walls were closing in. I'd been job hunting for months with absolutely no success. My savings were gone. My possessions were being held hostage. And now I had just 3 days to find new accommodations with literally no income. It felt impossible. That night, sleeping fitfully on Chloe's couch, I was plagued by stress dreams, showing up to job interviews naked, running through endless hallways of locked doors, my parents' laughter echoing as I frantically tried key after useless key. I woke up utterly exhausted, a throbbing headache pressing behind my eyes. "You look terrible," Chloe said, not unkindly, as I shuffled into the kitchen. "Maybe you should talk to someone." "Like a therapist?" I muttered, "With what money?" "No," she corrected, her brow furrowed. "Like a lawyer. What your parents did. It has to be illegal, right?" The thought had certainly crossed my mind. But attorneys cost money I absolutely did not have. Besides, suing my own parents felt like crossing an irreversible line, even after everything they'd done. "Let me see what happens Saturday when I get my things," I said, trying to sound hopeful. Maybe they'll have cooled off by then. But deep down, in my gut, I knew better. This wasn't a spontaneous outburst of anger. This was a calculated move, the culmination of years of conditional love. My parents had finally found the ultimate way to control me, by systematically removing every last shred of my security. That afternoon, I used the last of my precious cash to buy a prepaid phone card, terrified my cell service would be cut off since my bank account was frozen. I was applying for a barista position. Any job would do at this point, when my email notification chimed. The sender, Miller and Associates Law Firm. The subject, urgent, regarding Jenkins family property and assets. My heart plummeted. Were my parents actually suing me now? For what? For being a disappointment? With fingers that trembled so violently I almost dropped my phone, I opened the email that would completely transform my understanding of the past 28 years. The email began formally, "Dear Miss Harper Adams, I am contacting you regarding urgent matters pertaining to the Eleanor Jenkins Trust, for which our firm serves as legal executive. Recent events have necessitated our immediate intervention. Eleanor Jenkins. My grandmother." My heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "It has come to our attention that your current residential status has been compromised, which constitutes a direct violation of the terms established in your grandmother's trust. We request an immediate consultation to discuss your legal options." The message included contact information for David Miller, senior partner, and requested I call at my earliest convenience. A chilling confidentiality notice at the bottom warned against unauthorized disclosure. I read it 3 times, then a 4th, trying to make sense of it. My grandmother had a trust? One that somehow involved my residential status? And what did they mean, legal options? With shaking hands, I dialed the number. "Miller and Associates, how may I direct your call?" came a professional, calm female voice. "This is Harper Adams," I said, my voice barely steady. "I received an email from David Miller about my grandmother's trust." "One moment, please, Miss Adams." After a brief hold filled with generic classical music, a deep, resonant male voice came on the line. "Miss Adams, thank you for your prompt response. I'm David Miller. What's this about my grandmother's trust? I blurted out, unable to contain my confusion. I wasn't aware she had one. That's precisely why we need to meet, he stated. There are confidentiality concerns I can't address over the phone. Could you come to our office tomorrow morning at 10 a.m.? Yes, I can do that, I heard myself say, scribbling down the address he provided. Excellent. And Miss Adams, please bring any documentation of your recent living situation and the circumstances of your departure from the family residence. After hanging up, I sat frozen, my mind racing a mile a minute. My grandmother, Eleanor Jenkins, had always been the family maverick. A successful business owner, she married late, traveled extensively, and frequently butted heads with Brenda over parenting philosophies. While my parents relentlessly pushed me toward prestigious, practical careers, Grandma Eleanor had always encouraged my creativity and independence. Some people need to control others to feel secure, she once told me, during a particularly difficult period with Brenda and Gary. True strength is letting people find their own path while standing ready to catch them if they fall. She'd passed away 3 years ago from a sudden heart attack. The funeral had been brief and formal, just as Brenda preferred. I remembered being surprised that Grandma's substantial estate seemed to transfer to my parents without much legal process, but I'd been too grief-stricken to question it then. Now memories flooded back, little comments Eleanor Jenkins had made, meaningful glances when Brenda and Gary discussed her assets, her insistence on speaking with me alone during her final years. One day, Harper, she'd said during our very last visit, holding my hand tight, "You'll understand just how much I believe in you. Promise me you'll never let them crush your spirit." I'd attributed it to the usual grandmotherly encouragement. But what if it had been something more? That night, I barely slept, my mind constructing countless scenarios. By morning, I'd cycled through everything from inheriting a small savings bond to discovering my grandmother had been a secret millionaire. I arrived at Miller & Associates 15 minutes early, acutely aware of my wrinkled clothes and the dark circles under my eyes from sleepless nights. The building was an imposing downtown high-rise, its lobby a gleaming expanse of marble and glass. I felt desperately out of place. At the reception desk, I gave my name with as much confidence as I could possibly muster. "Miss Adams, welcome," said the receptionist, a polished woman in her 50s. "Mr. Miller is expecting you. 15th floor, suite 1520. The elevator ride gave me a precious few moments to compose myself. Whatever this meeting revealed, I needed to appear capable, collected, strong. Suite 1520 opened into a tastefully understated reception area with plush leather seating and discreet lighting. Before I could even approach the desk, a tall man with distinguished silver hair and a perfectly tailored suit emerged from an interior office. "Miss Adams, David Miller. Please come in." His office was spacious, but not ostentatious, with sweeping views of the city skyline and walls lined with towering shelves of law books. He gestured to a comfortable chair across from his desk. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. I understand you're in a difficult situation." "That's putting it mildly," I said, then quickly caught myself. "Sorry. It's been a stressful few days." "Completely understandable." He opened a thick folder on his desk, his expression serious. "Miss Adams, were you aware that your grandmother established a family trust prior to her death?" "No," I admitted, my heart beginning to pound again. "I knew she had assets, but my parents handled everything after she passed. That's part of the problem." His expression turned grave. "Your grandmother established what we call a conditional trust. The Adams family home, where you've been living until recently, was placed in this trust, along with significant financial assets." My heart began to race, a frantic drumbeat in my ears. "What kind of conditions?" "The primary condition was that the property would remain your family home, with guaranteed residence rights for all direct Adams family members, including you. Your parents were named trustees, but their right to occupy the property was explicitly contingent on your continued access to the home whenever you needed it." The implications hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. "Are you saying the house is actually part of my grandmother's trust, not my parents' property?" "Correct." The house belongs to the Eleanor Jenkins Trust. Your parents have been receiving a monthly stipend from the trust to maintain the property, with the understanding that it would always remain available to you. And by changing the locks and barring me from entry, I trailed off, the realization dawning. They've violated the fundamental terms of the trust, he confirmed, his voice firm. Which is why our firm, as the trust's legal executive, was automatically notified. Automatically notified? I whispered, utterly stunned. How? Your grandmother was quite thorough, Miss Adams. The trust includes monitoring provisions. When your access credentials failed to open the locks on 3 separate doors within a short time frame, it triggered an alert. I must have looked completely dumbfounded because he added gently, your grandmother anticipated potential family dynamics issues. She wanted to ensure your interests were protected. Tears welled in my eyes, hot and stinging as the full, profound meaning of his words sank in. My grandmother hadn't just loved me, she'd taken concrete, deliberate steps to protect me from exactly the kind of rejection and control my parents had just enacted. There's more, David continued, pulling out additional documents. The trust includes substantial educational funds that were to be made available to you upon request. According to our records, you've never accessed these funds despite completing your degree. Did you apply for these through your parents? No, I whispered, shaking my head. I worked multiple jobs to put myself through college. My parents said they wouldn't support my business degree. David's expression darkened. I see. That's extremely concerning, as your parents, as trustees, were legally obligated to inform you of these available funds. We'll need to investigate whether there's been financial impropriety. The room seemed to spin around me, the implications staggering. Not only had Brenda and Gary locked me out of a home that wasn't technically theirs to control, but they might have been actively withholding education funds specifically designated for me. What happens now? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, yet strangely clear in the ringing silence. You have several options, David said, his tone shifting, becoming more formal, more lawyerly. As the trust beneficiary, you can invoke immediate enforcement of its terms, which would require your parents to restore your access to the property within 24 hours or face significant financial penalties, including potential removal as trustees. You mean, I could force them to let me back in, or potentially remove them? The words felt alien on my tongue. Yes. Alternatively, we could negotiate a settlement that respects your grandmother's intentions while allowing for a more amicable resolution. This might include establishing separate housing for you, funded by the trust, while your parents continue to occupy the family home under revised conditions. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process this complete, dizzying reversal of power. For my entire life, I'd been at Brenda and Gary's mercy, financially, emotionally, practically. Now, in a twist I could never have anticipated, I held significant legal leverage. I need time to think, I finally managed to say. Of course. David handed me a USB drive. This contains digital copies of the relevant trust documents for your review. I suggest you familiarize yourself with your full rights before deciding how to proceed. We'll need your decision within 3 days, as the trust terms require prompt action on violations. As I stood to leave, a final question nagged at me. Mr. Miller, how did you know my parents had locked me out? I understand the key alert, but how did you know the details? A small, knowing smile crossed his face. Your grandmother requested specific monitoring of the property. We have an arrangement with a trusted local contact who confirms any suspicious activity. Mrs. Wallace. My grandmother's oldest friend. The pieces clicked into place. As I left the office, clutching the USB drive, I felt simultaneously overwhelmed by the gravity of it all, and yet, strangely empowered. My grandmother had seen this coming. She'd created a safety net I never even knew existed. For the very first time since finding myself locked out, I felt something unexpected. Hope. Real, fragile hope. Back at Chloe's apartment, I immediately plugged the USB drive into my phone's adapter and began devouring the trust documents. The legal language was dense, but the core message was crystal clear. My grandmother had created an elaborate, brilliant safety net specifically designed to protect me from Brenda and Gary's controlling behavior. The Addams family home, that colonial where I'd grown up, the house I'd just been locked out of, had actually been purchased by my grandmother decades ago. She'd allowed my parents to live there, to raise their family, but she had never transferred ownership. Instead, upon her death, the property was placed in trust with very specific conditions. My parents could continue living there rent-free and would even receive a generous monthly stipend for maintenance and property taxes, but only if they guaranteed that I would always have a place in that home whenever I needed it. The moment they violated that condition, by changing locks or otherwise preventing my access, they would trigger a series of escalating consequences. First, a formal warning. If access wasn't restored within 7 days, the monthly stipend would be suspended. If the situation remained unresolved after 30 days, Brenda and Gary could face removal as trustees and potentially lose their right to occupy the property entirely. They risked losing everything just to teach me a lesson, I whispered to myself, still struggling to comprehend the sheer magnitude of their gamble. But the property revelation was just the beginning. As I continued reading, I discovered that Eleanor Jenkins had established a substantial education fund that should have been available to me throughout college and remained accessible for further education or professional development. According to the documentation, Brenda and Gary, as trustees, had received quarterly reminders about these funds. Yet, they'd watched me work 3 grueling jobs, take out mountains of loans, and struggle financially through college, never once mentioning this available support. Most shocking of all was the personal letter from my grandmother, included in the digital files. Dated just 2 months before her death, it spoke directly to me. "My dearest Harper," it began, "if you're reading this, then something has gone wrong. I've tried throughout your life to buffer the controlling tendencies I've observed in your parents, my own daughter included. But I've always feared that without my presence, their behavior might escalate. This trust is my way of protecting you even after I'm gone. You have always been brave enough to forge your own path, even when it was difficult. That independent spirit is your greatest strength, though your parents may see it as defiance. The funds and provisions included here are not about money, but about freedom. The freedom to make your own choices without economic coercion. Use these resources wisely, but never feel guilty for claiming what is rightfully yours. Know that I am prouder of you than words can express. All my love, Grandma Eleanor." I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face, blurring the words. Even from beyond the grave, my grandmother had found a way to support me, to validate my choices, and to provide the fierce, unconditional love my parents had always withheld. The next morning, I returned to David Miller's office, armed with a clearer understanding and a barrage of questions. "I've reviewed the documents," I told him, once we were settled. "I'm still processing everything, but I have serious concerns about the education fund. It looks like my parents have been misusing it." David nodded gravely. "We've begun a preliminary audit. The initial findings are, indeed, troubling. It appears that regular withdrawals have been made from the education fund over the past 3 years, despite you not being enrolled in any educational programs during that period." "They've been taking money that was meant for me?" I asked, my voice tight with disbelief and rising anger. "Is that even legal?" "As trustees, they had technical access," he explained, "but the terms clearly state the funds were exclusively for your educational benefit. If they've been using these funds for other purposes, it constitutes a serious breach of fiduciary duty." The betrayal cut deep. Not only had they denied me access to crucial financial support during college, but they appeared to have been actively helping themselves to my inheritance since my grandmother's death. "We've also confirmed through property records that significant renovations were made to the family home last year," David continued, his words like another sharp blow. "A new kitchen, master bathroom upgrades, and a backyard landscaping project, totaling approximately $87,000. I remembered those renovations. Brenda's dream kitchen, with custom cabinets and top-of-the-line appliances. Gary's elaborately landscaped backyard retreat, complete with a built-in grill and a serene water feature. Projects they'd proudly claimed they'd been saving for over many years. They used my education money to remodel the house," I said flatly, the pieces snapping together with sickening clarity. That appears to be the case, David confirmed. We'll need to conduct a full forensic accounting to determine the exact amounts and timing. I sat back, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of their deception. What are my options? David outlined 3 potential paths forward. First, I could pursue immediate and full enforcement of the trust terms, which would likely result in Brenda and Gary being removed as trustees, potential legal action to recover misappropriated funds, and a forced restoration of my residence rights. Second, I could seek a negotiated settlement that acknowledged the violations, but allowed for a more measured resolution, perhaps establishing separate housing for me, funded by the trust, while imposing stricter oversight of my parents' trustee activities. Third, I could attempt family mediation, with legal representation present, trying to resolve the situation while preserving some semblance of a family relationship. Given what I've learned, I asked, a new resolve hardening my voice, why would I choose anything but the first option? David leaned forward, his expression serious, earnest. Miss Adams, in my 30 years of practice, I've seen how family legal battles can unfold. Even when someone has been deeply wronged, as you have been, the emotional cost of a protracted legal fight against one's own parents can be devastating. I would be remiss not to present all options. I appreciated his candor. What would you recommend? I suggest we begin with a formal legal notice outlining the trust violations and your rights as beneficiary. This gives your parents an opportunity to respond before we take more aggressive action. Sometimes, simply demonstrating that the power dynamic has shifted is enough to bring the other party to the table. It made perfect sense. Let's do that. I'll prepare the documents today. We can deliver them tomorrow. As I stood to leave, another question gnawed at me. Mr. Miller, did my grandmother ever express why she set up such elaborate protections? Did she know my parents would do something like this? He considered his words carefully. Your grandmother was a remarkably perceptive woman. During our discussions about this trust, she expressed concern about what she called conditional love, the tendency of your parents to withdraw support whenever you made choices they disagreed with. She believed this pattern might escalate after her passing. She saw it all so clearly, I murmured, a fresh wave of grief and gratitude washing over me. Indeed. Her primary concern was ensuring you would have the freedom to build your life on your own terms, without economic coercion. That's why the trust includes not just housing provisions, but educational and career development funds as well. As I left the law office, I felt a complex mix of emotions, profound grief for my grandmother, who had understood my struggles so deeply, a searing rage at my parents for their deception, and a growing sense of fierce determination. This wasn't just about reclaiming my place in the family home anymore. This was about standing up for myself in a way Eleanor Jenkins had always believed I could. The formal legal letter was delivered to Brenda and Gary the very next day by courier. David called to confirm receipt and warned me, wisely, to prepare for their reaction. It came within hours. A relentless barrage of calls and texts from both parents, their tones ranging from incredulous to furious to suddenly, sickeningly conciliatory. What is the meaning of this? Gary demanded in his first voicemail, his voice booming even through the phone. Some lawyer shows up with ridiculous accusations about your grandmother's wishes. This is outrageous. Brenda's approach was, predictably, more emotional. Harper, her text read, I can't believe you would do this to your own family. After everything we've done for you, please call us immediately. An hour later, their tone had shifted dramatically. Honey, there's clearly been a misunderstanding, Brenda's next text pleaded. We never intended for you to leave permanently. Let's talk this through as a family. I forwarded each message to David without responding directly. His advice was clear. Let the legal process work. Do not get drawn into their emotional manipulation. Late that evening, Caleb called. Harper, what the hell is going on? Mom and Dad are completely freaking out about some trust and lawyers showing up at the house. Did they tell you what they did? I asked, my voice edged with a new, quiet power. Locking me out? Taking my education money? A long pause. They said you're twisting things. That grandma's trust was meant for the whole family, and you're trying to use it against them. I laughed bitterly, a harsh, humorless sound. Of course, that's what they said. Ask them about the $87,000 kitchen remodel paid for with my education fund. That can't be right, he stammered, clearly stunned. They said they saved for years. Caleb, I have the financial records. They've been stealing from me since Grandma died, just like they've been controlling both of us our entire lives. Another long, heavy silence. I don't know what to believe right now. Then come to the meeting, I challenged. David is arranging a formal discussion with all parties present. See the evidence for yourself. After I hung up, a strange calm settled over me. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel powerless against my parents' manipulation. I had the truth. I had legal standing. And I had my grandmother's unwavering support, even from beyond the grave. The stage was set for a confrontation that would either tear my family apart completely or force a long overdue reckoning with decades of controlling behavior and conditional love. Either way, I was finally ready to stand my ground. The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 10 a.m. in a conference room at Miller and Associates. David suggested neutral territory would be best for such a charged discussion. I spent the days leading up to the confrontation preparing, both practically and emotionally. David provided me with a complete financial breakdown of the trust, highlighting specific instances where funds designated for my education and welfare had been shamefully misappropriated. The total exceeded $120,000 over 3 years, money that should have supported my education and career development. Chloe, ever the supportive friend, helped me assemble a professional outfit from her closet, since most of my clothes were still held hostage at Brenda and Gary's house. You need to look like you're in charge, she insisted, lending me a tailored navy blazer and a crisp white blouse. The morning of the meeting, I arrived 30 minutes early, my stomach a knotted mess despite all my preparation. David met me in the lobby. Remember, he advised, as we rode the elevator, this isn't about punishment. It's about establishing boundaries and ensuring your grandmother's wishes are honored moving forward. The conference room was intimidatingly formal, a long mahogany table surrounded by plush leather chairs, water pitchers and glasses meticulously placed at each setting. David had arranged for an associate to take notes and for a financial advisor from the trust management team to be present. At precisely 10 a.m., Brenda and Gary arrived, accompanied by a lawyer of their own, Mark Thompson, a longtime family friend and Gary's golf partner. My brother, Caleb, slipped in behind them, looking profoundly uncomfortable and utterly out of place. The initial greetings were stiff, formal, a thin veneer over raw tension. Brenda attempted to approach me with an embrace, but I took a step back, maintaining a professional distance. Her hurt expression might have once shattered me, but I now recognized it for what it was, a manipulation tactic. Once everyone was seated, David opened the proceedings. We're here today to address serious concerns regarding the administration of the Eleanor Jenkins Trust, specifically violations of the residence provision and potential misappropriation of designated funds. Gary immediately interrupted, his voice booming with feigned indignation. This is ridiculous. Eleanor was my mother-in-law. We had countless conversations about her wishes for the family home. With all due respect, Mr. Adams, David replied evenly, his voice calm but firm. The legal documents speak for themselves. The trust terms are explicit regarding Miss Harper Adams's guaranteed right to reside in the family home whenever needed. He slid copies of the relevant trust sections across the table. Furthermore, he continued, our financial audit has identified numerous withdrawals from the education fund that appear to have been used for home renovations and personal expenses, rather than Miss Adams's educational benefit, as stipulated. Brenda's face had gone ashen, pale with shock. Gary looked frantically between his lawyer and David, clearly unsettled by the directness and weight of the accusations. Mark Thompson cleared his throat, attempting a deflection. We acknowledge there may have been some technical violations of the trust terms, but these were minor administrative oversights, not deliberate breaches. Changing the locks to explicitly bar a beneficiary from the residence is hardly a technical violation or administrative oversight, David countered, his tone still professional, but now with an undeniable edge of steel. nor is withdrawing over $120,000 from a designated education fund for personal home improvements. Caleb's head snapped up. $120,000. Mom, Dad, you said it was just some maintenance expenses. Gary shot him a swift, warning look, but the damage was done. The truth was beginning to crack through their carefully constructed facade. For the next hour, David methodically presented the evidence: financial records, property invoices, the very text messages documenting the lockout, and finally, my grandmother's explicit, undeniable instructions regarding my welfare. With each new piece of evidence, Brenda and Gary's position weakened visibly, their faces growing more strained, more desperate. Finally, when the damning financial presentation concluded, David turned to me. Miss Adams, would you like to address your concerns directly? Taking a deep, steadying breath, I looked directly at Brenda and Gary for the first time since the meeting began. My voice was calm, but imbued with a power I'd never known I possessed. My entire life, you've used financial control as a weapon. When I chose business over medicine, you cut me off completely. You watched me work 3 jobs through college without ever mentioning the education fund Grandma Eleanor Jenkins established for me. And then, when I needed shelter during a truly difficult time, you exploited my vulnerability to reassert control over my life. My voice grew stronger, firmer, as I continued. What hurts most isn't the money. It's that you betrayed not just me, but Grandma Eleanor, too. She trusted you to honor her wishes, to support my independence, even when you disagreed with my choices. Instead, you violated that trust in every possible way. Brenda's eyes filled with tears. We only wanted what was best for you, Harper. We've always just wanted you to succeed. No, I replied firmly, cutting her off. You wanted me to succeed on your terms, following your plan. That's not love. That's control. Gary, looking utterly cornered, finally erupted. This is how you repay us for raising you. By sicking lawyers on your own family. Your grandmother would be ashamed. Actually, Mr. Adams, David interjected smoothly, without missing a beat. Mrs. Eleanor Jenkins anticipated this exact scenario. That's why she established the monitoring protocols and enforcement mechanisms in the trust. She left explicit instructions regarding her concerns about your controlling behavior toward Harper. He produced my grandmother's letter, copies of which were distributed around the table. As Brenda and Gary read her words, Eleanor Jenkins's clear, undeniable voice from beyond the grave, the fight seemed to drain out of them. Brenda covered her mouth, tears streaming freely now. Caleb, who had been silent throughout most of the meeting, finally spoke. I had no idea any of this was happening. Harper, why didn't you tell me how bad things were? He asked, his voice raw with regret. Would you have believed me? I asked gently, my gaze softening slightly toward my brother. You've always seen a different version of Mom and Dad than I have. He looked down, acknowledging the painful truth of my words. After a moment of heavy silence, David redirected the conversation. We need to establish a path forward that honors the trust terms while allowing for family healing, if possible. Miss Adams has prepared a proposal. I nodded, pulling out the document I'd prepared with David's help. My voice, when I spoke, was steady, resolute. I'm not interested in punishing you or creating an ongoing legal battle. What I want is independence and a recognition of the harm that's been done. My proposal has 3 parts. I outlined my terms clearly. First, the trust would purchase a small condo for me, using a portion of the education funds that should have been available during college. This would provide me with stable housing while I rebuild my career. Second, Brenda and Gary can continue living in the family home, but financial oversight of the trust would transfer to an independent trustee to prevent any further misuse of funds. Third, we would all commit to family therapy to address the patterns of control and conditional support that have damaged our relationship for decades. And if we refuse? Gary asked, his usual bluster and confidence having completely evaporated. David answered before I could. Then we proceed with formal enforcement of the trust violations. This would likely result in your removal as trustees, potential legal action to recover misappropriated funds, and a significant reduction in your benefits under the trust. Mark Thompson leaned over to whisper something to Gary, who listened with a tightening jaw before finally nodding, defeated. "We'll need time to review the proposal in detail," Mark stated formally. "Of course," David replied, his tone firm. "We can give you 48 hours. After that, we'll need to proceed with enforcement actions as required by the trust terms." As the meeting concluded, Brenda approached me while Gary was still speaking with their lawyer. "Harper," she said quietly, her voice hoarse, "I never meant. I didn't realize how this looked from your perspective." It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was perhaps the closest she could come in that moment to acknowledging the profound harm she'd caused. "I know, Mom," I replied, my voice softer now. "That's why I included family therapy in my proposal. We need to learn how to communicate without control or manipulation." She nodded, a complex mix of emotions crossing her tear-stained face. As everyone filed out of the conference room, Caleb hung back to walk with me. "I should have paid more attention," he said, his shoulders slumped. "I knew things were always tense between you and them, but I had no idea about the money or how they treated you during college." "You were the good child," I said, without bitterness, a pang of empathy for him in my heart. "You never had reason to see that side of them." "I want to help fix this," he offered, meeting my gaze, "whatever happens next." For the first time in days, a genuine glimmer of hope flickered within me, a hope that some family relationships, even if they would never be the same, might just be salvageable. 47 hours later, David called with the news. Brenda and Gary had accepted the proposal, with only minor modifications to the therapy requirements. The process of establishing my new housing would begin immediately, and I would have unrestricted access to the family home to retrieve my belongings whenever I wished. The confrontation hadn't been the dramatic, theatrical showdown I'd half imagined, with villains vanquished and justice thunderously served. Instead, it had been something far more complex, more raw, a painful, yet absolutely necessary dismantling of harmful patterns that had persisted for decades. As I hung up the phone, I realized that my grandmother, Eleanor Jenkins, had given me not just financial security, but something infinitely more valuable. She'd given me the opportunity to finally break this suffocating cycle of conditional love and control that had defined my family for generations. 1 month after the settlement, I stood in the living room of my new condo, still absolutely amazed by the sudden, dramatic turn my life had taken. The space was modest, yes, but it was entirely mine. A comfortable one-bedroom unit in a pleasant neighborhood, purchased with funds from my grandmother's trust. Natural light streamed through large windows, illuminating walls I could paint any color I wanted, shelves I could fill with books Brenda and Gary would never approve of, and a life I could finally shape according to my own values. The settlement had proceeded smoothly once my parents accepted the inevitable. The trust purchased the condo and established a monthly stipend to help me rebuild while I searched for permanent employment. My parents retained the family home, but with an independent trustee overseeing all financial decisions related to the trust, a truly humbling arrangement for Gary, especially. Most of my possessions had been retrieved from Brenda and Gary's house during a tense, but surprisingly civil, Saturday afternoon. Caleb had helped, acting as a much-needed buffer when Gary made passive-aggressive comments about ungrateful children, and Brenda vacillated between tearful appeals and cold silence. "They'll adjust eventually," Caleb had whispered to me as we loaded boxes into his SUV. "This is the first time they've ever faced real consequences." The most challenging aspect of the settlement was, by far, the mandatory family therapy. Our first session had been nearly unbearable. Gary initially refused to speak, his arms crossed, jaw tight. Brenda cried continuously. The therapist, Dr. Evans, had her work cut out maintaining any semblance of productive dialogue. Family patterns don't develop overnight, and they won't be resolved quickly either, she warned us at the end of that difficult first hour. This process requires commitment from everyone. To my surprise, my parents actually continued attending. Gary's participation remained minimal, a tight-lipped presence, but each session brought tiny, almost imperceptible moments of clarity. During our third meeting, Brenda had acknowledged, for the very first time, that her own parenting had been shaped by her mother's controlling behavior, the very pattern Eleanor Jenkins had tried so hard to break. Mom could be so critical, she admitted quietly, her voice small. Nothing I did was ever good enough. I promised myself I'd make sure my children succeeded where I had failed. I thought I was being a good mother by pushing you. It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was the beginning of understanding. Meanwhile, I'd begun my own individual therapy with Dr. Chin, a compassionate woman who specialized in family trauma. What you're experiencing is a massive shift in power dynamics, she explained during our second session. For your entire life, you've been the dependent one, the one seeking approval. Now, suddenly, you hold significant leverage. That's a difficult transition for everyone. She helped me work through the complex emotions, the vindication tinged with guilt, the profound grief for the parents I'd always wished for, the lingering anger at years of manipulation, and the tentative, fragile hope for a healthier relationship in the future. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or excusing, Dr. Chin reminded me often. It means releasing the expectation that the past could have been different and choosing how to move forward with clear boundaries. Those boundaries became my fierce new focus as I rebuilt my life. With stable housing secured and basic financial needs met through the trust, I could finally pursue career opportunities that truly aligned with my values. Rather than merely accepting any position out of desperation, I applied to a master's program in digital marketing, something I'd always wanted to pursue but couldn't afford after undergrad. Using the legitimate education funds from the trust, I enrolled in fall classes, feeling a profound sense of finally, truly, following my grandmother's intended path. Caleb and I developed a closer, more authentic relationship through this process. Free from our parents' comparative dynamics, we discovered a genuine friendship. He confessed that he'd always envied my courage to pursue my own interests, despite Brenda and Gary's disapproval. He admitted during a coffee meetup, a weary sigh escaping him, perfect grades, right college, right career, and I'm not even sure I like being an accountant. I just never questioned it. It's never too late to make changes, I told him, recognizing with a start how much I sounded like Eleanor Jenkins. The most unexpected development came from Mrs. Wallace, my parents' neighbor, who had shown me such kindness during the lockout. She invited me to tea one afternoon and revealed that she had been my grandmother's closest friend and confidant. Eleanor worried about you constantly, she told me, serving Earl Grey in delicate cups. She saw how Brenda and Gary's controlling behavior was affecting you. That's why she established the trust the way she did. You were her eyes and ears, I realized, connecting her to the trusted local contact David had mentioned. She nodded. Eleanor asked me to keep watch over you, especially after she was gone. When I saw them changing those locks, I knew immediately it was what she had feared most. Thank you, I said, fighting back fresh tears, for helping her protect me. She was so proud of you, dear. Your independence, your determination to forge your own path. Those were qualities she valued above all else. Those words stayed with me, becoming a touchstone as I navigated my new reality. 6 months after the settlement, things had reached a tentative equilibrium. Family therapy continued, with incremental, slow progress. My parents and I maintained a careful distance, Sunday dinners once a month, brief phone calls weekly. The raw edges of betrayal were slowly healing, though our relationship would never, ever return to what it had been. Perhaps that was for the best. Brenda had even begun individual therapy herself, occasionally sharing insights about her own upbringing that helped me understand, if not excuse, her behavior. Gary remained more resistant to change, but had at least stopped actively undermining the therapy process. The trust continued operating as designed, with transparent financial reporting that prevented further misuse. I accessed education funds appropriately for my master's program, experiencing for the first time the support my grandmother had intended all along. As I prepared for my second semester of graduate school, an unexpected email landed in my inbox, a marketing internship opportunity with a rapidly growing digital agency. Perfectly aligned with my studies. I applied immediately and was called for an interview. The morning of the interview, I stood before my mirror, professional and confident in a way I hadn't been during those desperate job searches months earlier. On my nightstand sat a framed photo of my grandmother, Eleanor Jenkins. Her wise eyes and subtle smile seemed to approve of the woman I was becoming. I picked up the photo, speaking softly to her image. "You saw it all coming, didn't you? You knew I'd need protection, and you made sure I had it when the time came. I wish you were here to see that your plan worked." In that quiet, powerful moment, I realized the profound gift my grandmother had given me. Not just financial security, but the chance to finally, irrevocably, break generational patterns of control and conditional love. She had created the ultimate safety net, one that allowed me to stand firm in my own truth and build a life based on authenticity, rather than simply others' expectations. As I headed out the door to my interview, I felt her presence with me, a deep sense of gratitude for her foresight, her unwavering belief, and her unconditional love. The journey hadn't been easy, and there was still so much healing ahead. But I was finally walking a path of my own choosing, exactly as my grandmother had always intended. This entire ordeal forced me to redefine what family truly means and to fight for the future I deserved. I'm still on that path, learning and growing. I want to ask you, have you ever had to set firm boundaries with family to protect your own well-being or your dreams? How did you navigate it? Share your experiences in the comments below. I'd love to hear them. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life narratives. Remember, sometimes the family we choose and the boundaries we bravely set are the most important steps toward finding our true selves. You deserve support that doesn't come with strings attached.